Tonight, my guest tonight is a race car driver. Race car is spelled the same forwards and backwards. Does she put it in R for race? And then, how much wood could a woodchuck chuck if woodchuck wood? 4 chords. And later, more stories from Silicon Valley, from adjacent to greatness. Who will Steve Jobs yell at this time? There's no stopping us now, because we're live.
I'm John Thompson.
I'm Jim Tu.
I'm John A. Vink.
I'm Jennifer Sim.
I'm AJ Minnick.
I'm Keith Stanfield. Those stories and more tonight on John Wants Answers.
John wants answers. John wants answers. Give John answers. Give John answers. John wants answers. John wants answers. Give John answers now.
Check your calendar. If it says March 14th, 2019, then we're live. My guest tonight is Nicole Jacque. Jacque.
Good. Jacque.
Jacque.
There you go.
All right. Thanks for being on the show. Nicole is a race car driver. So we're going to hear all about that. We'll be taking your tweets. You could tweet Nicole and I at John Wants Answer. There's no S on the end, because S is for suck. If you don't want to tweet us, you can go to the website and send us a message at johnwantsanswers.com. There's a contact tab. Press it and write us a message. All right, let's get straight to the show about race cars. We have a video of you racing a car. Let's see the first video to see what we're looking at here. So that was you racing, right?
That was me racing, yes.
So that's just not some guy in a car on 101 trying to...
It's not a guy at all.
Oh, it's a lady.
I love that video because, I don't know if you noticed it, but at the end there, when somebody hit me while I was in the middle of the turn, I give this like little yelp.
Oh, you were hit?
I was hit.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
You can't really tell, like I had control. But I like, when I felt the car start moving, I actually like kind of like yelp in this. And as somebody else that races told me, like, you know, you might want to like take the sound out of that.
Do a little sound editing?
Yeah, just remove that part.
I think it's lovely. I'd leave it in if I were you. I'd make it louder. I'd turn into like maybe a bark from a dog. Woof, or something like that.
I'll keep that in mind for next time.
Okay. We have some pictures of your car. Let's see what your car looks like from the outside. Look at that. That looks like a car I would expect to see in NASCAR or Formula One or all those other things.
That's a Mustang.
It's a Mustang from the Ford Motor Company. Okay, let's see the next picture. And there you are again. You're number 27.
Yes. So all of my cars, regardless of which one, even when I've changed cars, I always keep the number 27. Mostly because that way, when somebody says like, "Hey, what's your number?" real quick, and it's really easy to remember that.
Okay. Let's see the next picture we have. Are you in this one?
I am.
You're in the front?
So you see not the red car in the middle, the car to the left of it.
Okay.
That's me.
You're coming straight for us.
I am. And it was. I don't know if you can tell, but it was raining. That was a really exciting race.
Oh.
It was wet.
Okay. I can see the
And
reflection
slippery.
of the lights off the pavement. Mm-hmm. The asphalt. We have one more picture to show you. Look at that. You're in the pit. You're getting it all fixed up.
That's my crew checking my car. They're checking tire pressure and stuff.
Is this before a race or like during a race?
This was coming in right after qualifying, so they're checking my tire pressures to make sure that everything was as expected, and then I decide whether or not I want to go back out and do a few more laps, or if my times are what I want them to be.
So they're not in a race for the life right here?
Not right here, no.
Okay. Are your races long enough? You have to like do pit stops during the race?
I usually do not do, so races that are long enough that you have to do pit stops are what are called endurance races. The problem is the longer the race, the more expensive it is, and the more people that you need for pit crew. So generally I do what are called sprint races, which are short enough that you don't need to do that.
Okay. So what would you call the racing that you do?
So it's road course racing, and specifically I race in SCCA, in the majors level of racing, so it's sort of like the top level of amateur racing.
Okay. So any day now, the major's going to call you and bring you up from the farm team.
It doesn't quite work that way, but I can dream. It could happen.
So to get to the majors, do they call you or do you just give them money?
That is a big part of it. Is a lot of racing, just in general, is you give somebody money, different people money. The people that work on your car, the people that the series that you race in, you pay money to race. But you have to have completed at least a certain amount of racing so they know that you're not some bozo who's going to just come crash everybody out.
Right, right. That makes sense. So when I don't really watch racing on TV, but I'm familiar with NASCAR, where they do a lot of left-hand turns, and that's basically all they do. But when I saw the video here, you weren't doing that.
No.
So what kind of tracks do they call it where it's not just an oval?
So road course racing, I actually have
Oh,
shaped like this.
Are these
I don't know if you can see
actual
it. This is an
tracks?
actual map of this is Laguna Seca, which is actually close here in Northern California.
Laguna Seca?
Yep, it's in Monterey.
It's very famous. I've heard of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is another California track. This is Thunder Hill.
That looks very exciting. That's a
It
lot of
is.
turns.
It's very exciting. But so the idea is that you have right turns, left turns. Some turns are very tight. Some of them are long and sweeping. You've got hairpins. You may have elevation change. You don't always have elevation change. But Laguna Seca, for example, you go up a very tall hill / mountain from the top of which you can actually see the ocean.
Ooh.
Not that I'm
You ever
actually
get
looking.
distracted?
I did not actually know that you could see the ocean from there until somebody told me, even though I had driven it like 100 times.
Oh, okay.
Because you're kind of busy thinking
Yeah.
about something else.
Yeah, yeah.
Like you're like, am I gonna like go
Am I
to the right
gonna
place
die?
and die?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know. So, but then you drop about 2 stories and you're turning at the same time. So it's very exciting.
Is it a steep drop?
It's pretty steep, yeah.
What kind of grade? Do you know?
I don't know what the grade, but I mean like it's pretty steep.
Yeah.
It's it would be like San Francisco type hills.
Okay.
Like that
Some
kind
of those hills
steepness.
freak me out.
Yes,
Yeah.
those kind of hills.
All
The
right.
kind of hills that you think maybe it should just do like the little S thing and snake back and forth, and instead it just goes straight down. One of those.
One of those. So, like, how many tracks do you regularly race on?
Oh boy. I usually make it to about 4 or 5 different tracks a year. Sometimes a few more, but that's pretty sure that I'll get to about that many.
And where are these tracks located? I mean, they're probably nationwide, but the ones that you go on mostly.
So I actually race across the country. I actually keep a car on the East Coast and one on the West Coast because it's very expensive and time-consuming to move a car for
Right.
long distances. So on the West Coast, I race at Monterey, Laguna Seca, Button Willow, which is south, kind of like on I-5.
I know what that is.
Thunder Hill up north, Sonoma Raceway in like Napa, Pacific Raceways up by Seattle, and then out east. So like this year already, I've already raced at Homestead, which is actually a NASCAR track, but they adapt it for road course. So you do most of the oval, and then you actually do a little track that comes inside. So you actually do get to turn both right and left. NASCAR is still working on it.
Okay.
And Sebring, Watkins Glen, New Jersey Motorsports, Mid-Ohio, VIR, all on the East Coast.
Okay. For NASCAR, do they call it oval? 'Cause it's not really an oval shape. It's
It's
round,
actually kind of a sort
straight,
of a,
round, straight.
yeah. So they call it an oval. It is not an actual oval. It's
Okay.
kind of like a sort of a triangle that's been kind of rounded off a lot of times what it looks like.
Okay. So in your league, you're in the Sports Car Club America, right? So I understand how you win a race by crossing the finish line first.
Yes.
And then the flag gets waved,
This
right?
this is the best part right
If they
here.
wave and you're the one crossing at the time, you've won that race.
Yes.
But I guess winning overall the season, how does that work?
So it's points. So you get a certain number of points for finishing first, second, third, and so on. And so whoever has the most points in a particular class at the end of the year wins.
So what's the spread like? What would first place points get you?
First place is 21 points. Second place is first place is 25. Second is 21. Third is 18, and then after that, it's fourth is 17. Fifth is 16. So you
So
do
you get points for being even beyond third.
yeah.
Okay.
But the points are much closer together. Whereas if you're
Right.
between first and second, you get
big-
a lot more
yeah.
points. There's also at the end of the year there's a big championship race, and for that you have to meet some criteria for like having done and met certain performance levels in other races, and then you can race in the national championships race, which is called the runoffs. But that's just a straight race. So you just put kind of all the top people out there, and whoever crosses the finish line first wins.
Okay. Now, during the season, how many races do you do?
Not nearly as many as I would like. Generally, I'd say probably about 6 or 7 races. There have been years where I've done a lot more like, probably 15. But usually that is difficult both schedule-wise and financially.
Right, right. Is there a maximum how many races you can do in a year?
Only limited by your wallet.
Okay. But if you wanted to win, why wouldn't I just keep racing every weekend and I could get more points than someone who raced 3 times?
So no matter how many races you do, they will only take your top, a certain number, depends on by division and stuff like that, but usually it's like maybe your top 8 races or your top 5 races. So if you race more times, you have the option to, if you have some really bad races, you can take your best set of races. If you race less than that or only that many, well, you've got to go with the ones that you actually did.
What if they take your top 8 races and that season you only raced 6 times?
Then you're at a disadvantage to anybody that raced more than 6 times.
Yeah, so you should, if you want to compete seriously,
Yes.
at least 8.
Yep.
Okay. Now, what kind of skills does someone need to have to be able to race well?
So car control is definitely a big one, and understanding of the physics of racing. And there's a lot of things that you do when you're driving a race car that you would not want to do on the street. So when you're on the street driving, you don't want to come up to a stop sign at like a screeching stop. That's just a bad idea. But you think of like if you were attempting to brake really fast, that's how you are applying the brake on the racetrack. You don't actually come to a complete stop, but you're putting a lot of brake pressure on very quickly to slow the car down as quickly as possible and then get back to gas. You want to spend as much time as possible on gas.
Right.
You would never drive like this on the street.
Well, shouldn't try that.
Well,
on the
okay,
street.
shouldn't not. But so there's that, and then there's also just some techniques like heel toe, which is where when you're actually shifting, you want to actually match the revs. So you actually, as you are shifting, you are hitting both the brake and the accelerator pedal while you have the clutch depressed. Yeah,
Do you have 3 legs?
that's where it gets very difficult. So you have one foot pressing down the clutch, and you have one foot pushing on the brake pedal, and then you sort of slide it this way. So you have one foot going this way and trying to push. It's hard. It's really
Yes.
it's really hard.
I imagine. Okay, wow. How do you get around cars? Because I figure if I was in this race, well, first there's qualifying rounds, right?
Yep.
And that identifies your pole position. So is it that the worst qualifying time gets the first place in pole position, or
The last.
Last.
So the fastest person gets to start first.
Oh, okay.
And then they line everybody up in pairs of 2 behind them.
So if you're in first place, you can just be swerving back and forth, and no one can pass you.
Not so much. So you are technically, now this is one of the things is that it's a little bit up to interpretation, right? But the rule is that you are not allowed to block. You're allowed 1 defensive move, but other than that, you have to stick to what they call your racing line, which is basically you can't be suddenly changing positions because of the other car.
Okay.
So you have to be driving essentially more of the track. Now, what you can do is drive defensively so that, for example, generally you want somebody wants to pass you on the inside of a turn. If you bring your car a little more towards the center of the track or even inside, they can't get inside of you.
Right.
But you can only do that once. If you do that and then they come back over here, you're not allowed to
can't go
move
back.
back.
Yeah,
Now people do, of course, and then there's lots of arguments afterwards about so and so blocked me. Sometimes the stewards will decide that's true, you got blocked. They penalize the other person, maybe a position or something like that. And sometimes they're just sort of like, we can't really tell. There's a lot of times it's not very clear cut. But generally, no, you cannot just swerve back and forth.
Okay. We have another video of you racing. Okay.
Okay, so this is actually not coming from my car. I am So we're coming to this turn here, so we have to slow down.
Oh yeah. Oh, that person did fast.
Now there's a really tight turn coming up here, coming into it's called turn 2. Everything has to slow way down. It's very narrow.
Slowing down? No! Oh my gosh! Not ever slow down! Oh my! first person not stopping for insurance reasons. They have to get the insurance, don't they? After a collision?
So first of all, the result of all of that is that the car and the other car that came in out of control hit another car, which spun, which hit another car, which hit me. So then I ended up finishing the race with my bumper dragging behind my car.
Does that affect your performance?
So I don't think it actually affected the handling of the car. It did turn out that there was some frame damage. I was actually completely unaware that this thing was like dragging behind me.
Okay.
I'm told it was
so you
actually...
can't hear it hitting the ground or anything.
No, but I'm told there was actually like some smoke coming off of it from where it was dragging on the ground.
You could have exploded.
Probably not, but I mean, anything's possible. But apparently it was pretty exciting, but I was missing all of that. I couldn't see it. But as far as I could tell, it didn't affect the handling of the car. But that was the result of all of that. I was an innocent bystander.
Right.
Yep.
So when that happened, do they stop the race or everyone just keeps on going and moving around the collision and hope it's cleared up by the next lap?
Everyone keeps on going unless if there's a car that's disabled, can't move, and it depends on where they're stuck. If it's deemed that they're in a unsafe position, then they need to send a safety truck out to go and get them.
Right.
Depending on the track and depending on where they are, in some cases, they can send a tow truck out and do it while everybody's still racing. They may fly a flag that tells people they have to slow down while they're close to the truck, but otherwise you race like normal. Like
That sounds very dangerous for the tow truck operator.
it is, and they get really upset if you do not obey the flags that tell you to slow down near it. Yes, and people have definitely gotten hurt. But other than that, if you are racing, you keep going unless you absolutely cannot, or unless there is like a race official flying a flag telling you cannot.
Okay. So you said you have 2 cars.
I do.
That must be expensive.
Yes, it is.
And these are special cars. So, like, what's preventing me from just going to the car store, getting a Mustang, and going to the track and be like, I'm here, I want to race?
Mostly the officials will stop you.
Okay.
But the reason that they'll stop you is that would be unsafe. You'd also be not competitive. So what you need to do, first of all, to be competitive is you would need, for example, racing tires. You would need racing shocks. You would need a racing radiator. Depending on the class, you might need other performance modifications. It depends on what the class allows. But safety-wise, you would also need a full roll cage so that if you are hit, so that if you have your car rolls over, it protects you from the car, like basically collapsing in on you. And then you also need fire suppression. You need an electrical cutoff switch so that if the car is on fire, they can easily turn off the power. Those are all sort of things besides just performance modifications that separate street cars and race cars.
Okay. Now, once you've made those changes to your car, can you then go take your car on the street and race home?
You could. It would be inadvisable. Most real street cars, once you have them modified to the point that you are racing them, they're not street legal anymore. Because you strip out everything you don't absolutely need, like you take out all of the interior. You lose things like turn signals.
Oh.
Which some people don't use anyway, so maybe that's not a big deal. I don't know.
But makes it, like,
do you use your turn signal?
All the time. It's on right now.
So you're one of the people that's turning left around the planet, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But you don't have anything like that. You don't have airbags, which you have all kinds of other safety stuff, but it's not stuff that has been rated for use on the street.
Okay.
So if you got stopped by a cop, they would be very upset with you.
Wouldn't the safety stuff you have for racing be above and beyond the safety stuff for just driving down the street?
If you are wearing it properly, yes. I have actually had like 2 very bad crashes that were due to somebody dropped oil in front of me, and I lost control on that and hit a wall.
While you're racing?
While racing, yeah.
That sounds like something they do in like Spy Hunter or video games. Oil slick.
Except not intentionally, because the other car's engine was blowing up.
Oh,
so they weren't exactly thrilled about it either. But I was even less thrilled. But I actually, in one case, hit the wall, and I have the telemetry of this. I hit the wall, probably still going 75, 80 miles an hour.
Like head on or sideways?
Sort of sideways, but mostly head on, and walked away. Like and nothing other than feeling very sad about my car and a bruised wallet.
Because your car is probably totaled, or
We were actually able to fix it, but it was not looking good.
happy. Okay. Now my car, I have an electric car. Now, can I race that, or is it not made for racing?
You can, and there is definitely some kind of motion in the industry to move towards having electric cars racing. There is actually an electric Formula car kind of league where they're sort of trying that concept out. The problem with electric cars is fuel. So you have a battery, and you're going to use that battery very rapidly because unlike being on the street, you are going to be going full power all the time. So in a street car, like if you have a Tesla, for example, they're great. I mean, linear acceleration is fantastic. As a race car driver, I would love to have that. The part that's a problem is that it is so hard on the battery that after, I think, like for example, at Laguna Seca, people have tried this, right? After about 2 laps, the car goes into limp mode.
Oh.
Because otherwise it's going to like overheat the battery and set you on fire, which apparently is bad. But other than that, they're looking at other, like for example, having race cars where you could swap out a battery.
Right.
So that if you use it very rapidly, that's how you would refuel. Instead of putting gas into a car, you swap the battery.
Okay. You're a lady driver. That's rare, isn't it?
Pretty rare, yeah. A lot of times I'm the only woman at an event.
Are in the whole league, how many women are there? Like, you know all of them by name because there's so few?
Close to it. There was the biggest national championship event, which was at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway a couple years ago. There were over 1,000 drivers registered, and I counted 12 women.
12. That's worse than computer science.
It is, yeah. It's pretty bad. SCCA they have a couple programs that they're trying to encourage women to come and try it out, but it's I think going to be slow going. Partially because there is a certain amount of investment. Like there's a high barrier to entry with this. So it's not like somebody can just be like, oh, hey, that's cool, I'm going to go try it. You have to go get a race car first and all that kind of stuff.
All right. Thanks, Nicole. Now, a woodchuck.
The woodchuck, also called the groundhog, is one of the larger Canadian rodents. A mature adult may weigh up to 17 pounds. In winter, it depends almost entirely on body fat until April, when new plant food reappears. Like the beaver, the woodchuck's front gnawing teeth grow continuously, except during hibernation. Constant grinding trims them down. The breeding period lasts 3 months, and from 4 to 5 young are usual. In May, at about 7 weeks, the young are weaned and cautiously begin to forage on their own. However, they still depend almost entirely on their mother to warn them of impending danger. For more information on the woodchuck, contact the Canadian Wildlife Service in Ottawa.
Scott Knaster has lived and worked in Silicon Valley since before there was Wi-Fi or horrible traffic. He has many stories of weird and wonderful things, but mostly weird. Scott tells these stories on stage in a show called Adjacent to Greatness. Tonight, Scott is debuting a new story.
The Grateful Dead was the greatest touring band in the history of rock and roll. They played over 2,300 shows in front of more than 25 million people. Apple Computer, at the time of this story, was the 292nd biggest company in America. Not quite as impressive, but we were scrappy and we believed in ourselves. And so when my boss met a member of the Grateful Dead, he thought, well, let's have them come to Apple and give us a private concert. Here, Scott, you do it. So I called up the Grateful Dead and said, why don't you come and give us a private show, and we'll give you a couple of Macintoshes in return. And the person I talked to said, we don't do bar mitzvahs, by which she meant, we don't do your little private shows. We don't do little corporate shows. We don't do one-off shows. We're a serious band. So not to be daunted, I said, okay, what if we send you a couple of Macs and you can use them to write music with? And then you can come and tell us how that went, how that worked out. Now, this was back in the dark ages, before Logic, before even GarageBand, when computers weren't really being used by serious bands to make music. But they said yes, they said they would do that. So great. So we sent them a couple of Macs. Now, the way we did it was fun. At the time, Apple had a program called Kids Can't Wait, where we sent computers for free to schools. So we called this Rock Stars Can't Wait. Maybe not as much of an investment for the future, but it was a good way to get free computers sent off to the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead received our computers, and we figured they were plugging away, making their songs, and they would come in and tell us all about it. So we set a date, and we got a big auditorium at Apple, probably 300 or 400 people, seats in the auditorium. And then we started to worry about a mob scene. We started to think about crowd control. Security, what's that? We didn't know anything about that at the time. So we were suddenly concerned that we would be overrun with deadheads. Deadheads are Grateful Dead fans. And we kind of forgot to tell anybody at Apple that we were doing this. So on the last day, the day of the show, the day of the presentation, I ran around like crazy saying, hey, the Grateful Dead is coming to talk to us. And people said, what are you talking about? But a few people listened to me, and we got the little auditorium about half full. And then they showed up, and I was going to be the host. So I went to get, I didn't even know who was coming. Was Jerry Garcia going to show up at Apple? The answer is no, but we did get Bob Weir and John Perry Barlow, very famous member of the band and songwriter. And I didn't really know who they were, so I had one of my buddies who was a Deadhead help me out. And he says it's still one of his greatest memories of working at Apple, and thanked me for doing that. And I'd forgotten I did it, so I said, you're welcome. And as we showed them around the campus and took them to where the presentation was going to be, they took the stage and they started to tell this wonderful story about how they'd used the Macs to change the way they wrote music. And they were writing a song, and then just last night, before the presentation, the Mac crashed, and they lost all their work. And we were all really sad, and we were practically crying because we had cost the world a Grateful Dead song. But then something unexpected happened. John Perry Barlow, who was speaking, said, you know, actually, that's not what happened. We didn't write songs with the Macs. We were playing games with them, and they were using them in the accounting department. We couldn't figure out how to write songs with them. I said, why did you tell us this story? You know, why did you first say you were and then say you weren't? And he said, well, when I got to the auditorium, I figured out that it was full of deadheads. And deadheads, if you lie to them, that's bad karma, especially if you're one of their pantheon, one of their gods. He said, lying to deadheads is like drowning puppies. He didn't want to drown any puppies, so he told us the truth. But something else happened to Barlow after this. He became very interested in computers, and he was more than a songwriter. He was really interested in privacy and online rights and security. And after a couple of years, he and a couple of other guys founded the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's the leading organization for internet and online rights and security for the last 30 years, let's say. And John, bless him, he wrote somewhere in public that the Electronic Frontier Foundation would not exist without me sending him computers. But this is completely not true. It would have existed, but that didn't stop me from putting it on my resume.
All right, great story, Scott.
Thank
I
you.
love hearing your stories about Silicon Valley.
I love you hearing my stories.
All right, our next show is going to be April 11th. And so thanks, Scott Knaster, for being on the show. Thanks, Nicole, Jacque, for being on the show. And high five, guys.
Nice shot.